Okay, I'm just gonna get us sharing screens and okay, is this showing up okay for everyone? Perfect. Okay, so thank you so much for having me today for practices of Indigenous information gathering at Xwi7xwa Library. At the core or at the center of this presentation, I've really wrapped it around the question that we commonly get at the reference desk or within instructional sessions of, can you direct me to the section on insert topic? And we've had this as broad as, can you guide me to the section on education? And as narrow as, can you guide me to the section on mollusks? So if anybody's wondering, we don't actually have a section on mollusks. It's very specific. And we're just going to basically go over how we complicate and unpack that question. How do we complicate and unpack the assumptions that patrons are making on how we organize our information at Xwi7xwa Library? Then I'm going to delve into how I bring this into my instruction, and then how I was able to adapt it to an online and virtual environment during the pandemic. So before I begin, I just want to start with a territorial acknowledgement. I'm currently streaming to you folks on the shared, unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples in what is commonly known as East Vancouver. Xwi7xwa Library and the University of British Columbia's Vancouver campus is on the territory of the Musqueam people. So when I was thinking about my acknowledgement today and what this means in the context of this presentation, I was reminded that the resources, whether they're recorded in text materials or in audio, are things that we can physically collect. But one of the examples that I'm going to be using for us is language. And the Musqueam folks are Hunkaminam speaking people and have an incredible team of language, the language department, who's working effortlessly to revitalize and strengthen their language. So I've been thinking a lot about how when we are gathering information, we can only take people so far with what we physically have in the collection, and that this information and this knowledge is also within people, living people and bodies, and that they are just as relevant, important to this work. And then an introduction to myself and the branch. So my name is Karleen Delaurier-Lyle. I am Ojibwe, Swampy Cree, and mixed settler ancestry. I'm a member of Barons River First Nation in the province of Manitoba, and I am the Information Services Librarian at Xwi7xwa Library. So what we're looking at here are a couple images of our roof. We are shaped like a kakuli, which I will talk about a little bit more in a minute, but we are the only branch of an academic library that focuses on Indigenous perspectives. So we are one of many branches at UBC Library, but our focus is on Indigenous materials and research. And I'm going to be referring to this image a lot, so I wanted to make sure that people kind of grasped what we're looking at here. But on the left-hand side, it's just the basic blueprint or the bare bones of what our structure is. We've got many offices. You can see 3 purple lines at the bottom of the kakuli, and that's representative of our stacks. So you can see we're small but mighty. We're the second smallest branch of the UBC Vancouver campus library system, but we have a pretty decent comprehensive collection. It does take up a small portion of our structure, but also for folks that are unfamiliar with the interior Salish pit house or a kakuli, they're typically covered, the roofs are covered, and ours is open. So if folks could visualize a donut or a bagel, that can kind of help with understanding our hollow center. So I'll be referring to the 3 stacks in the middle here quite a bit. For information organization and description at Xwi7xwa Library, we use a locally developed classification and subject heading system to organize our materials. And this is an adaptation of the Brian Deer classification system that was developed by Mohawk librarian Brian Deer. Our scheme is specific to BC, which basically means that this is a priority area for us. We'll have more comprehensive descriptions that are relevant to the nations within those provincial borders, and then kind of the ones that fall outside of those borders as well, whether it's the US or the provincial ones. Each item in our library is assigned a single general class of knowledge, just as any library, right? That's represented by call numbers. And we also have the First Nations House of Learning subject headings, and our records are enhanced by an in-house cataloger. So unlike the other UBC library branches, we have that are at the whim of Central Technical Services who get a basic record. We have someone that comes through and enhances our records, and it's time consuming, which you'll see will matter later on in the presentation as well. But let's get into the question, the common question that's at the foundation of this presentation, which is, can you direct me to the section on? And in this presentation, we're going to focus on languages. So what we're looking at here is a PDF version of a bookmark that we have printed out in our library, which is the classification system, right? So at the beginning of our call numbers from A to Z, or A to Y, sorry, we'll start with reference in the A's, and then we've also got history and culture under the B's, and it goes all the way down to literature in the Y call number section. So if someone had asked me, I'm looking for languages, I would, if I fulfilled this request and just stopped there, direct them to the X call number, because this is the section on languages. And here, what we're looking at is, again, in the stacks, I would be limiting them to simply the books and the print materials in our stacks represented by the larger red star, some of the DVDs that are in the X call number, and only one single drawer for languages in our vertical files. So on the right-hand side, what we're looking at is a visual of what that looks like in the bays. So people are really limited to just that section. But when I unpack and complicate the question of information gathering for Indigenous knowledges, we can see that in order to support student research, we usually will need to look at various sections of the library rather than just a single dedicated location. And in the context of Indigenous knowledges, this is especially true because there's, and again, not to get too pan-Indigenous here, but I really do believe that it's something that we do have in common is the organization of our knowledge is still very relational. And it can be difficult for our in-house cataloger to figure, where am I going to place this book or this resource in one dedicated section of the library when it could realistically live in various spaces, right? So I wanted to use an example from Dr. Robin Walkimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, who's from the Potawatomi Nation. And here she's giving us an example of the word pecan. So this comes to English from the Indigenous language. Pecan is a nut, any nut. The hickories, black walnuts, and butternuts. So we see evidence of language and also a bit of history. So much was scattered and left along that trail, graves of half the people, language, knowledge, names. My great-grandmother, Shinote, wind blowing through, was renamed Charlotte. When they got to Kansas, they must have been relieved to find groves of nut trees along the rivers, a type unknown to them. Without a name for this new food, they just called them nuts, pecan, which became pecan in English. So although this resource is just giving us little hints of language, they're also giving us a bit of history as well, and experience that's specific to her nation and her family. But when we look at the item record for braiding sweetgrass, we can see that it's under the call number N, and N is for natural resources and environment. So what that looks like in the stacks is if I'd only directed folks to the X language materials, the sections that are cataloged under the call number X, they would have completely missed this, even if it was something that was of use for their research, right? So how do I bring this into my instruction? I've pulled seven examples here. Essentially what I do is I try to flip this in the classroom. So in our seminar room where we host instruction, I will actually pull examples and bring them in to the class and ask them to think about these 3 questions. So within the text, what are you finding that's related to, and in this case, it's language? How might this be useful for your assignment? What are the limitations of the resource? What is missing, or what do we want to know more about that is not covered in the text? So here we're looking at queer Indigenous studies, We All Play, which is a children's book, Xwi7xwa People and Plants, Lillooet World of Charlie Mack, Sami Education, Braiding Sweetgrass, and Dakwakata Warriors, which is a graphic novel. So in small groups, depending on the size of the class, in small groups or as individuals, they will break up into small groups and they will jot down kind of their thoughts and reflections based off of these 3 questions. And then we'll come back together and discuss. What did you find? What was missing? How is this or is this not useful for a language assignment? And then I'll get them to look at the call numbers. So the resources that I'd shown you in the previous slide come from the education section, natural resources, Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer studies section, nutrition, ethnobotany, Tachone language, primary literature. And the last one, you'll notice, does not have a call number. So as I mentioned earlier as well, we have an in-house cataloger that has to go through and ask themselves, where am I going to place this resource and why? And we don't want to make those resources unavailable. So we give them a basic barcode and alphabetize them in the new book section. I'll get the groups or the individuals to then take their resource and place them back into the stack so they can physically see if they had only gone to the X call number. Look at where are the other students standing? Where is everybody else in the stacks? And what would we have missed? Whether it was from the print resources or the vertical files or the DVDs and the audio sections, what would we have missed if we only stopped at just the call number X section? So it's quite the difference, right? And then how did I get this virtual? So like many libraries, not all libraries, but like many, we did have to close temporarily because of COVID. Then we had construction next door. Our library resides next to a longhouse, and it's under construction right now. So we had to close down so that we didn't have to listen to jackhammers all the time. And then this last fall, because of the tremendous amount of snow and rain that we received on top of the construction, we actually flooded. So we are still closed and displaced from our branch. How was I going to, now that I was using physical materials, get people to do the same activity, but also understand the same concept without kind of that really amazing appeal of being physically in the stacks? And the answer is pretty simple. It's e-resources. E-resources became my best friend. They were very, very useful. This is just the item records for braiding sweetgrass that are either online or that are at other branches at UBC Library. So what we essentially did was that we would do the same activity where people would go into the online resource and then see, again, using those same guiding questions, how is it or is it not useful?
You have 5 minutes left, Karleen.
Thank you. And then we would compare it to the item record, right? So we would be able to use Xwi7xwa's catalog record for this item and still be able to do and replicate the same activity by using a PDF version of our classification scheme. The problem was that it did also create an extra step, right? In order we had to make sure that there was an e-copy of something in order to bring it into the classroom. But we also had to teach people, okay, you're using the online, but also look at the item record for Xwi7xwa to figure out where would it be in the classification scheme. What are you missing? What are you not missing? But also with that extra step, it was an opportunity because not a lot of folks will understand that if we have it out on loan, there might be an e-copy or there might be a copy at one of the other UBC library branches. So we just tried to use this as an opportunity to make sure that people are finding the information that they need in a different way. And lastly, I just wanted to leave people with contact information should they want to chat more about this session or if they had any questions that they came up with later on.
Wonderful, amazing presentation. This was great work. It was nice to see visually. Yeah, it's great exercise. So we have a question already. What would Indigenous information literacy look like from Rob?
We've been talking about this quite a bit. I think the added layer that our team discusses is not only who the author is, like background of an author, right? We all kind of ask that question is, where's the information coming from? But the complicated piece for Indigenous information professionals is what is the relationship between the author and the people that they're writing about, right? Are they from that community? If they're not, do the researchers have a solid relationship or an ethical relationship or something that we'd consider to be a good relationship with the communities that they're writing about? Was the research produced or was the authorship produced in conjunction with the folks that they're writing about? Who benefits? Is this something that is it just a replication of something that's extractive research, or is it something that's giving back reciprocally to the community? Those are things that we might want to think about when we're bringing research forward. There's also within Canada, right, in order to partner with Indigenous people, either an individual or community members or nations, right, there's different ethics training that we have to go through. And that's something that I can't remember the dates, but it's relatively new, comparatively speaking, to historical anthropological research. So being aware of kind of the national standards for research that we do in collaboration. Yeah, it's more just where the information's coming from, I would say.
Linnea just wanted to say that she talks about Brian Deere classification in her Library 101 class. She's happy to hear about it in this presentation. And then Elsie said, this is an interesting approach. Did you write any specific learning outcomes for this exercise? And what do you hope students take away from this activity and then do differently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for the learning outcomes in this, it's essentially just getting people out of that mindset that it's going to just be in one section. And I'm sure we face this in many branches, right? It's not something that we specifically struggle with. I think everybody does, but just getting people to understand that, yeah, we're not just going to, we're very welcoming people. You can come ask us many questions. We can have a conversation and unpack what your research question is and figure out where else you need to look, rather than having this sort of intimidation factor. Just point me to where I need to be so that I don't need to bother you, right? Is I think how people must feel a lot in our branches. So that's the outcome. The outcome is just, let's have a conversation. We need to make sure that you're actually finding the resources that you need to support your very important research. So the outcome is essentially that. Let's look elsewhere. Let's get creative. I've seen people that were just ecstatic because they found what they were looking for their language project, and it was in a kid's board book. And they had been working tirelessly to find this word or phrase, and it was just sitting right there in a children's book. So
checking the chats again. Rob said, thanks, very thoughtful ideas for us Western trained librarians.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rob. I would really agree with that, actually. It's I also don't like for folks to just specifically look for information from our physical branch either. Again, we're the second smallest, so some things are great resources that we just physically cannot fit. So getting folks to also use some of the Library of Congress subject headings and realizing what are the differences in the search terms that we need to utilize in order to find those resources, right?
Thank you so much, Karleen. Does anybody else have a question they want to put in the chat? Waiting for type. If not, thank you so much, Karleen. That was a wonderful presentation. Really, really opened my eyes to certain things. So yes, thank you. And
Yeah. And I'll just leave my email in the chat in case somebody has like a midnight thought and they want to get in touch with me.
usually happens, yeah.
Thank you
We
so
also
much for
have
this
your information
opportunity,
on the
folks.
glib guides too. So yes, thank you for attending this week.